Hi, everybody. Sorry to be a little late. My background's a little disturbed also, but I see some of you are here, so thank you. Uh, I see Duck is here. Well, hi, Duck. Nice to see you. Hi, Steve. Thank you very much for coming. Okay, I'm going to make sure this is shared on Facebook at this point. I hope everybody is well tonight. I'm well. Just a little bit behind schedule, though. That's what's the problem. Okay, this is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And our topics for tonight are blank check. You can imagine what that's about. Going after Telegram. She and Putin, she and Putin, I said Putin, sorry, Jake Sullivan, had some meetings and some exchanges, and we have to discuss those. Hi, Evelina. How are you? Hi, Steve. And then finally, okay, the dead, okay, in Gaza. So let me get started with blank check right away. This is a piece by Alistair Crook. It appeared on August the 30th. You should be seeing it on your screens now. The name of it is, quote, "We told Israel," quote again, "Look, if you guys have to go, we're behind you all the way," unquote. Which is very unfortunate because that's exactly the problem. That's why they're going. If not for that, they wouldn't be going. Anyway, the caption, at least the caption below the photo, is uh, 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 America is trapped by its, quote, "ironclad," unquote, unqualified military support for Israel, which offers Netanyahu ample room for maneuver. Yeah, and that's exactly the problem. Quote, "The successful thwarting of Hezbollah's attack on Sunday," it's last Sunday, "symbolized Israel's intelligence and operational edge," unquote. According to the IDF, spokesman, I should give you the date of this. This was August 30th, yes. According to the IDF spokesman, the Hezbollah attack was thwarted for the most part, thanks to 100 Israel aircraft carrying out around-the-clock preemptive strikes that destroyed, quote, "thousands of missile launchers," unquote. Quote, "The group, Hezbollah, did manage to fire hundreds of rockets at northern Israel, but the damage they caused was quite limited," unquote, the Israeli spokesperson disdainfully suggested. Of course, this was amidst the complete blackout on publication, under full censorship in Israel of any reporting on damage caused to strategic Israeli infrastructure or to military sites. In effect, it was, quote, theater, unquote, mounted by both sides by limiting their 20-minute strike to within 5 kilometers of border and by Hezbollah staying within the, quote, equations, unquote, of war. Both sides signaled plainly to each other that they were not looking for all-out war. The winner narrative, quote unquote, from Israel was to be expected in today's war atmosphere, yet it comes as a cost. Amos Harrell in Haaretz suggests that, quote, there's a tendency in Israel, as a result, to view the success in foiling Sunday's attack as renewed evidence of the consolidation of regional deterrence and of Western strategic supremacy. But such an assessment, unquote, he concedes, quote again, appears to be far, from accurate. Indeed, it is far from accurate. The Sunday theater concluded with no change to the strategic situation in the north of Israel. Daily attrition continues from across the frontier of Lebanon down to the new 40-kilometer border defining the extent of Israel's loss of territory to the Hezbollah no-go zone. The strategic point is not that this narrative of a successful thwarting of Hezbollah's capabilities is highly misleading. Rather, it sets up expectations of available military success from which wrong conclusions will be drawn. We have been here before. It did not go well. Seymour Hersh, doyen of U.S. investigative journalism this week, reposted a piece that he wrote in August 2006 about U.S. thinking in the context of Israeli war on Hezbollah and on its intended role as a pathfinder project for a subsequent U.S. strike on Iran. What Hersh wrote then represents a striking deja vu of today's situation. It remains, hang on one second. Just water. Yeah, thanks. It remains to the point because U.S. neocon thinking rarely evolves, but remains constant. Quote, the big question for our U.S. Air Force, unquote, Hersh noted in 2006, unquote, was, unquote, Hersh noted in 2006, quote again, was how to hit a series of hard targets in Iran successfully. The former senior intelligence official said, quote, who is the closest ally of the Air Force in its planning? It's not Congo. It's Israel, unquote, the official continued. Everybody knows that Iranian engineers have been advising Hezbollah on tunnels and underground missile emplacements. So the USAF went to the Israelis with some new tactics and said to them, let's concentrate on the bombing and share what we have on Iran and what you have on Lebanon. I quote again, the Israelis told us that Hezbollah would be a cheap war with many benefits, unquote. A U.S. government consultant with close ties of Israel said, quote again, why oppose it? We'll be able to hunt down and bomb missiles, tunnels, and bunkers from the air. It would be a demo for Iran, unquote. And quote once again, I was told by the consultant that the Israelis repeatedly pointed to the war in Kosovo as an example of what Israel would try to achieve. Quote, the NATO forces methodically bombed and strafed not only military targets, but tunnels, bridges, and roads in Kosovo and elsewhere in Serbia for 78 days. Quote again, Israel studied the Kosovo War and its role model. The Israelis said to Condi Rice, "You did it in about 70 days, but we need half of that, 35 days, unquote, to finish off Hezbollah, unquote, unquote." And quote again, the Bush White House, unquote, a Pentagon consultant said, quote again, has been agitating for some time to find a reason for a preemptive blow against Hezbollah, unquote, adding, quote again, it was our intent to have Hezbollah diminished, and now we have someone else doing it, according to a Middle East expert with knowledge of the current thinking of both the Israeli and U.S. governments. All this, by the way, is still from 2006. Israel had devised a plan for attacking Hezbollah and shared it with Bush administration officials well before the July 12, 2006 kidnappings. Quote, it's not that the Israelis had a trap that Hezbollah walked into, unquote, he said. Quote, there was a strong feeling in the White House that sooner or later the Israelis were going to do it, unquote, Hirsch wrote. And quote again, Hirsch wrote, and then quote again from Hirsch, the White House was more focused on stripping Hezbollah of its missiles because if there were to be a military option against Iran's nuclear facilities, it had to get rid of the weapons that Hezbollah could use in a potential retaliation at Israel. Bush wanted both, Hirsch was told. And quote again, this time from Hirsch, the Bush administration was closely involved in the planning of Israel's retaliatory attacks. President Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney were convinced that a successful Israeli Air Force bombing campaign against Hezbollah's heavily fortified underground missile and command control complexes, in Lebanon could ease Israel's security concerns and also serve as a prelude to a potential American preemptive attack to destroy Iran's nuclear installations, some of which are also buried deep underground, unquote. A former intelligence officer added, quote, we told Israel, quote again, look, if you guys have to go, we're behind you all the way, unquote. Nonetheless, some officers serving with the Joint Chiefs of Staff were deeply concerned that the administration will have a far more positive assessment of the air campaign, and they should. The former senior intelligence officer said, and quote again, there is no way that Rumsfeld and Cheney will draw the right conclusion about this, unquote, he said, and quote again, when the smoke clears, they'll say it was a success, and they'll draw reinforcements for their plan to attack Iran, unquote. This is where we are today, says Alastair Crook. When the smoke clears from Sunday's, quote, exemplary preemptive attack in Lebanon, unquote, Netanyahu will be using it with Washington to draw reinforcement for his aspiration to engage the U.S. for a strike on Iran. And quote once again, strategic bombing has been a failed military concept for 90 years. And yet air forces all over the world keep on doing it. John Arquila, a defense analyst at the Naval Postgraduate School, told Hirsch, Rumsfeld, too shared this expert's jaded view, quote, air power and the use of a few special forces had worked in Afghanistan, and he, Rumsfeld, had tried to do it again in Iraq. It was the same video, but it didn't work. He thought that Hezbollah was too dug in, and the Israeli attack plan would not work. And the last thing he wanted was another war on his shift that would put the American forces in Iraq in greater jeopardy, unquote. Unquote again. The 2006 Israeli plan, according to the senior intelligence official, was, quote again, the mirror image of what the United States had been planning for Iran, unquote, unquote. The initial U.S. Air Force proposals for an air attack to destroy Iran's nuclear capacity, which included the option of intense bombing of civilian infrastructure targets inside Iran, were being resisted by the top leadership of the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps, according to current and former officials. They argued that the Air Force will not work, and the Air Force plan will not work and will inevitably lead, as the Israeli war with Hezbollah, to the insertion of troops on the ground. David Siegel, the then Israeli spokesperson, said his country's leadership believed, as of early 2006, that the air war had been successful and had destroyed more than 70% of Hezbollah's medium and long-range missile launching capacity. Israel, however, had not destroyed 70% of Hezbollah's missile inventory in 2006. It was deceived by Hezbollah's intelligence decoy operation. The Israelis bombed empty sites. Today, we hear the same exultatory narrative coming from IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Hagari, parading how successful Israel's strikes on Sunday had been. Likely some in Israel and U.S. Again will be deeply concerned that the Biden team may fall for a more positive assessment of the Israeli air campaign than they should. Many commentators across the West are making the same mistake. This Haaretz military correspondent noted, in respect to this Sunday's airstrikes, quote, there's a tendency in Israel to view the success in foiling Sunday's attack as renewed evidence for the consolidation of regional deterrence and strategic supremacy, unquote. Or in other words, Iran has been deterred from carrying out its, quote, commitment to retaliate, okay, for Ismail Haniyeh's his assassination in Tehran by the amassing of firepower by the U.S. in the waters of the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf and the fear of overwhelming U.S. firepower. Anyone seeing the video glimpses of Iran's automated and deep, quote, missile cities deployed throughout the depth of Iran, and which it has allowed to be exposed to momentary view, should understand that carpet bombing Iranian civilian infrastructure will not prevent the Iranian ability to respond with lethal force. Iran could unleash regional Armageddon, nothing less. So for clarity's sake, what exactly is it that is deterred and backing down? Is it Iran or Washington? Yet, if it's true that the Israeli campaign is based on the American approach in Kosovo, then it missed the point, unquote. General Wesley Clark, okay, the U.S. commander, told Hirsch. Killing civilians was not the objective. Quote, in my experience, air campaigns had to be backed ultimately by the will and capability to finish the job on the ground, unquote. And that simply for the U.S. to contemplate for Iran is impossible. Quote, we face a dilemma, unquote. An Israeli official told Hirsch in 2006. If we look at this from an effective standpoint, to decide whether to go for a local response, which is ineffective, or go for a comprehensive response to really take on Hezbollah and Iran once and for all, unquote. It's that decision that has to be taken. Plus ça change, says Alistair. The dilemma may not have changed, but Israel has altered very radically A majority in Israel today is messianic in its support for Jabotinsky's followers to do what they had also wanted and promised to do, to expel the Palestinians from the land of Israel. It is understood by many in Washington that the revisionist Zionists, who represent maybe about 2 million Israelis, intend cynically to impose their will on the, quote, Anglo-Saxons, unquote, by plunging the U.S. into a wide regional war should the White House try to undercut their neo-Nakba project of Palestinian forced expulsion. Benjamin Netanyahu has provoked Iran once with the assassination in the Damascus consulate of a top IRGC general, twice with the killing of Hania in Tehran, and a possible third would be were Israel to launch a so-called preemptive strike against Iran, believing that the U.S. would be trapped and politically unable to stand aloof as Iran retaliated against Israel. However, should the U.S. veto a strike on Iran before the U.S. elections, and Iran not retaliate for the death of Hania before then, the Nakba, quote, project, unquote, can be moved forward via extending the existing Gaza military offensive to the West Bank, which, by the way, is what we see going on, isn't it? Or through a grave provocation on the Haram al-Sharif / the Temple Mount, such as a fire at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The revisionist Zionists have been clear over recent years that some crisis or the confusion of war would be required to implement their neo-Nakba project fully. The United States particularly is trapped by its, quote, ironclad, unquote, unqualified military support for Israel, which offers Netanyahu ample room for maneuver. That is, folks, what a blank check actually does. And this is a blank check. Simply put, he specifically maneuvered, that is, towards the conflict that is Netanyahu's only escape hatch, upwards, unquote, quote unquote, as the, quote, walls of attrition, unquote, close in on Israel. Iran and Hezbollah seem to have chosen to, for now, to preserve their escalatory dominance through a return to imposed calibrated attrition on Israel. The U.S. will not be able to keep such a huge deployment of naval vessels in the region for long, but equally, Netanyahu will not be able to politically prevaricate at home for long either. Alistair Crook says this, and of course, right now we have these huge demonstrations in Israel, okay, that are going on. We had, what was it, 500,000 Israelis in the street. As a percentage of the population, that's equivalent, okay, to the U.S. having 20 million people in the streets here to oppose a particular policy. Is Netanyahu going to be able to resist that, or will he have to resign? I suggest it depends upon how long these demonstrations continue, okay, to go on. So that's our first topic. Steve Wolfbrand says, stop the world, I want to get off. Yeah, it's pretty tough, Steve. It's certainly pretty tough. So let's go into another very interesting happening that is very tough, okay, in another respect. specifically the actions of the EU in going after Telegram. The Telegram, of course, is a platform on the web in which many well-known people in relation to the war in Ukraine uh, uh, have a place on that particular platform, and it's very essential for up-to-the-minute news on what's happening in Eastern Europe, and also Ukraine. Extremely important. This is a piece by Pepe Escobar. He says, EU to Telegram, we're coming to get you. And there's a photo of a phone with Telegram on it. The Pavel Durov saga. Now, who is Pavel Durov? He's the person who runs Telegram. It's a saga that will keep on giving for a long time to come. This is what hot information war is all about, says Pepe. So let's attempt to connect several loose ends. A high-level Russian analyst makes the case that Durov's arrest is connected with, quote, anti-French protests in its former colonies, withdrawal from its traditional, quote, sphere of influence, unquote, where Telegram infrastructure was used to push anti-colonial and anti-Macronist narratives, unquote. Add to it, unquote, attempt to influence the narratives on Ukraine, both in Russian and the international media field, which is highly dependent on Telegram infrastructure, unquote. Paris is indeed desperate to make itself relevant when it comes to psyops and influencing special warfare in Ukraine. However, as the analyst notes, the French don't have the tech means to accomplish it. So this may have led the president, specifically Macron, deciding to, quote, exercise a personal pressure campaign against Durov himself. French authorities must be rather desperate in trying to keep their heads in the game of global politics. And Telegram, today, is his italics, the global politics. Wow, unquote. Paris was just waiting for a big break when the pilot of Durov's Embraer private jet submitted his flight plan. There was no warrant for his arrest in France. Only when the jet was on its way to Le Bourget, Paris, filed the warrant in haste. Durov was clueless all along. In a nutshell, Paris got a fateful heads up. He was flying into France, could have been via Durov's Dubai-based post-obsessive social climbing girlfriend, and laid out the trap, in a flash. Now we have, an eminence in jail. There's a myth that the FSB in the past asked Durov for Telegram's encryption keys. False. The FSB wanted Telegram to provide top access on investigations of serious crimes on a case-by-case basis. That's an enormous difference compared to what the U.S. government does with Meta or Twitter X via their totally open back doors. Durov, though, got drunk on NATO stands, quote, freedom and democracy, unquote, propaganda, and he rebuffed Russia and left. And that brings us to President Putin. Putin had better things to do than to meet Durov in Baku, and the Kremlin has gone on the record to deny the meeting. Durov was doing a tour of Central Asia and the Caucasus. They happened to cross their paths, in Azerbaijan. There's one thing that Putin never tolerates. betrayal of Russia, and that applies to the letter to Durov. When Durov went to the United States, the Americans predictably demanded Telegram's backdoors to surveil everybody. So he set up shop in Dubai and later applied for French citizenship. Durov became a French citizen only 3 years ago, significantly before the launch of the SMO via a special, quote, eminent foreigner, quote, program set up by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Very few are eligible. Only a, quote, French-speaking foreigner who contributes through their eminent action to the influence of France and the prosperity of its international economic relations. Well, no, quote, eminent action, unquote, was enough to keep him away from a French but slammer. And then Pepe explains how to get those keys. The European Commission, EC in Brussels, can be summarily described as a notorious bunch of bureaucrat cowards and or psychopaths cheerfully praising, quote, our values, unquote. Predictably, the European Commission refuses to comment on Durov's arrest, saying it's a, quote, national investigation, unquote. And, quote, investigation, unquote, which happens to have been, quote, encouraged, unquote, by the U.S. deep state, carried out since July 8th by vassal Macronist police to the benefit of NATO and the European Commission itself. The charges against Durov, revealed by France's prosecutor of the Republic, should be destroyed in court by any crack legal team. Essentially, the claims are that Durov himself is responsible for those abusing Telegram. He is, quote, complicit, unquote, of every misdeed under the sun, from organized fraud to drug trafficking, all the way to a hazy accusation of providing encryptive services without a, quote, certified declaration. The accusation about Telegram's lack of moderation are false. For instance, Telegram actively censors correspondence inside the EU. EU residents cannot access countless chats and channels. Moreover, Telegram is not concerned by the recent hardcore neo-Orwellian EU law against mega social networks because it harbors less than 45 million European users a day. So it's small potatoes from the European point of view. It's not like Facebook or Twitter in that way, or YouTube. Now let's focus on motive. The current liberal totalitarian Euro gulag or Eurolag is a massive power block that does not have access to Telegram's content. Telegram maintains its own servers around the world, and routing goes via Amazon, Cloudflare, and Google. Since the start of Telegram, the U.S. Intel surveillance has the means to easily block it if they feel like it. The EU is a different ballgame. So here we have Brussels via Paris trying to acquire at least some control over Telegram and social networks in general. A crucial reminder, which could be billed under the pathetic tech department, Europe has no, italics mine, says Pepe, social networks. Hence, the nonstop threats against Twitter X and the neo-Orwellian Digital Services Act over the responsibility of platforms in terms of content, which applies to all of them, not only Telegram. The EU and France desperately want what the hegemonic power already has in droves, access to everything right here, right now, with no legal documentation whatsoever. The key question now is, will they get it by applying pressure over Pavel Durov? There's no evidence he has Telegram's encryption keys. What if they got the wrong guy? Specifically, Nikolai Durov, who's Pavel's ultra-discreet brother, is the prime genius architect Telegram. Math master, 2 PhDs, gold medals in the International Mathematical Olympiad. The French would rather cut a deal, thus the extended interrogation. But that would imply breaking Pavel so he would influence Nikolai to hand over those fabled keys. Why now? Asks Pepe Escobar, and who profits? Predictably, Durov's interrogation goes on with zero transparency. France is an excruciatingly secret society prone to absolute silence on serious matters, nerve-wracking, slow, punctuated by rare formal declarations. It's all about procedure, and the bureaucracy is stultifying. Yet French bureaucracy may have given a precious hint on what really bothers them. They simply cannot accept that anyone uses or provides the means of, quote, obfuscation, unquote, in terms of financial transactions, bypassing censorship and bypassing surveillance. So this may go way beyond the obsession to get some or all of Telegram's encryption keys. The bureaucratic apparatus in France wants to go no holds barred to suppress any possibility of any bypassing or retaining the power to punish anyone. If the saga goes on, leading to trial and eventually a 20-year prison sentence, that means Durov would not be broken facing the bureaucratic apparatus, and he will always remain, quote, an accomplice, unquote. Hardly likely. Bye-bye to unlimited glitz and glamour in exchange for a daily stale baguette in a French jail, okay, which Pepe spells as Gaol. Two more inevitable questions. Why now? Because the AU needs it badly. And who profits? The leading candidates are the, quote, esprit de corps, of the ultra-regimented French bureaucracy and their Franco-European oligarch connections. Envy is also in the cards. Durov is Russian, an outsider, okay, and Telegram, with 1 billion users worldwide, 1 billion worldwide, but not in the EU, is a resounding success. Anything can happen further on down the road, including the blocking of Telegram in France and the EU. The global majority could not care less. Meanwhile, okay, multitudes marvel at how a narcissist tech globalist could be so naive as to believe that liberal totalitarianism would ever protect his freedom. I think that final comment from Pepe was a very wise one. We all cannot be so naive to believe that liberal totalitarianism is going to protect our freedoms. I myself am not so naive, okay, as to believe that. I don't think Scott Ritter believes it anymore, even though he will fight for it. And certainly Julian Assange doesn't believe it. But we have many, many outstanding cases of people who are no longer going to believe that. The next piece, which is also by Pepe, is about Xi and Sullivan, primarily. But there is a section of that that also comments, okay, on Durov. So I'm going to go through that first, and then I'll back up to the earlier part of the piece, which is on Jake Sullivan. I'll start with a paragraph from Pepe. We're slowly and surely advancing towards the establishment of a new world system managed by sovereign civilizational states. China, Russia, and Iran are at the forefront. The road through will be long and thorny with plenty of nasty setbacks. And that brings us to the current Pavel Durov judicial tech geopolitical saga. How Telegram, is geopolitics. Pavel Durov is now essentially a high level hostage in one of NATO Stan's key nodes, that is, France. NATO's military intel surveillance economic matrix finally got the leverage they actively sought for so long. For the moment, there's no answer to the key question: what did Durov offer his captors to be, quote, rewarded, unquote, with a temporary semi-freedom regime after posting bail that for his standards amounts to pocket money? So Durov got bail. That's really interesting. Durov is essentially accused of not, quote, collaborating, unquote, or, quote, cooperating, unquote, with Western intel. Their single-minded obsession is to control Telegram's content moderation setup, have total backdoor access, and eventually ban all Russian channels, which have been instrumental to carry the real stories on the ground developing from Ukraine to sub-Saharan Africa and beyond. Telegram is the social network of choice of the global majority. Telegram is at the heart of geopolitics. So this is yet another chapter of the no-holds-barred hybrid war by the collective West against the global majority. Telegram also happens to be extensively used in Russia by public and military bodies. It's a near certainty that Pavel does not have Telegram's fabled encryption keys, yet his math genius brother Nikolai does. As it stands, no one knows the terms of the deal leading to Pavel's semi-freedom. What is clear is that some sort of concessions were made, but Durov has not been turned into Assange 2.0. Well, that's wonderful. These concessions might include handing over selected information in a classic, quote, judiciary, unquote, type of mode that would not compromise Russian state secrets. The Durov brothers are certainly aware that any information leading Western intel to harass bloggers and channels for their political stance would fatally compromise the credibility of Telegram. Depending on how the French investigation proceeds, investigation is in quotes here, and it's characterized as a mega bureaucracy investigation, and whether the system decides to take Durov to trial or even to block Telegram in the EU, that will only benefit the Telegram from a global perspective. The saga is just beginning. As it stands, the world is waiting for a word by Pavel Durov himself on Telegram. I thought that sort of postscript to the Sullivan blog was very informative and very entertaining at the same time. But the primary part of that blog is called She Schools Sullivan. And that's the part that I want to turn to, right now. This was done on August 31st, 2024. It was 1,000 words, including the part I just read. Concerning Pavel Durov. Now, this is a picture of Jake Sullivan and someone else, probably from the U.S., having a conference with Xi Jinping. The caption on it is from Trump to crash test dummy. Hegemon's, quote, policies, unquote, have managed quite a feat. Pepe starts. It must have taken aeons of Taoist patience for President Xi Jinping to tell a few self-evident facts of life to a mediocre imperial functionary such as U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. He is a mediocre imperial functionary. Xi's key takeaways. One, quote, China is ready to be a partner and friend of the U.S., unquote, even as the reverse is highly doubtful, as China is considered by Washington as an existential, quote, threat, unquote. Two, China focuses on the well-being of all mankind. That's the core of Beijing's concept of a global, quote, community with shared future. And number three, China and the U.S. should be both responsible for history, for the people, and for the world. That's the, quote, three responsibilities concept. The last thing a unipolar hegemon is responsible for is the world at large. Unipolarity, by definition, profits only the empire's own plutocracy. So, if I may interject here, what she is saying as a takeaway is that it's necessary for the U.S. to renounce the unipolar hegemon concept and become a respected player in the multipolar world. For Xi, that's what this meeting with Jake Sullivan was about. But Jake Sullivan perhaps, had other ideas. Going on with the article. Little Sullivan, a sort of little diatribe from Pepe, also pushed for direct over the phone military to military communications at a working level. Of course, because the hegemon has less than zero paid moles infiltrated in key nodes of the Chinese system. So at least they will be able to hear little tidbits on and off from the Chinese military. Yet the key takeaway on the military dossier came during Little Sullivan's session with General Zhang Yuxia, the vice chair of China's Central Military Commission. General Zhang bluntly told Sullivan, in no uncertain terms, to stay away from Taiwan. Sullivan looked like a headless chicken after the meeting. As headless as after his meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Quote, the United States and China have not made progress in their negotiations to find a solution to the Ukrainian crisis, unquote. Of course not. Beijing sees through the whole imperial, quote, ceasefire, unquote, types of machinations, in parallel with the U.S. trespassing all Russian red lines. Moscow has not responded in a devastating manner yet, because Putin bears as many Taoist traits as Xi. China is back, says Pepe. Get over it. The Beijing leadership's meetings with the envoy of an ultra-lame duck U.S. administration may have been only a pro forma exercise. After all, what really matters is business. China's exports to the U.S. represent less than 2% of China's GDP. That's simply negligible. China is the top global trade and commerce powerhouse and real strong business ahead is not with the West, but with the global majority. China has been playing this long game, to perfection. So much perfection that imperial media has been literally freaking out about how deep China has integrated all across the global majority, challenging what is the de facto liberal totalitarian, what we say goes international, quote, order, unquote. See, for instance, here, and Pepe there is referring to uh, to an article at the nationalinterest.org called China Winning, the Global South. From Trump to crash test the dummy hegemons, quote, policies, unquote, have managed quite a feat. Included in the package is giving away the world's biggest tech market, China, exclusively to Chinese manufacturers, chasing away at least 75% of top Chinese scientists back to China from the US, and giving the entire Russian market, over 100 million consumers, to China, in parallel to Beijing buying loads more of cheap energy from Russia. This is just the beginning. Hegemon sanctions were actually instrumental in helping Beijing develop even faster the Made in China 2025 set of policies, becoming a leader or second best in 10 high-tech sectors. And the next stage is the several simultaneous steps towards de-dollarization, including the expansion of the petro yuan. A crack Chinese scholar summed it all up in his delightfully blunt style, quote, having the Levianesque advantage of being crystal clear, unquote. China is really back and will stay on for a very, very long time. No wonder this is beyond anathema for the imperial plutocracy and its Atlanticist vassals. We are slowly and surely advancing towards the establishment of a new world system managed by sovereign civilizational states. Russia, China, and Iran are at the forefront. But India, of course, will come on there too, quite strongly over a period of time. The road, though, will be long and thorny, with plenty of nasty setbacks. And that brings us to the current Pavel Durov judicial tech geopolitical saga, and that's where we came into this. So, another very masterful post, by Pepe, pointing to the geopolitical trends, also calling out the West's failure to understand what is going on with China and what is the reality of China and what is the reality of U.S. relations with China right now. That line about U.S. trade with China being only 2% of the GDP of China, that, is devastating. It means the Chinese are ready to give up trade with the U.S. at any point. They really now don't care much about the trade with us. They're prepared to seek other trading partners in the global south very quickly. They were developing those anyway. Let's see if my background has come back. Let me go to settings and see. Sometimes my virtual background goes away for no reason at all and then comes back, but no such luck here tonight, I'm afraid. Okay, so you're stuck with the very busy background with the pictures of my daughter, various members of the family, a very nice painting by my daughter, and Uh, also, the Nordic walking sticks I have. Anyway, going on. So the final thing for the night, which I know I'm a little bit over, but I'm going to go through it anyway because it's so important. It's a piece from Counterpunch, and this piece is really devastating uh, on the issue of fatalities in Gaza. So I'm going to bring that up, and I'm going to go through it as well. Beyond bombs and bullets, the full tally of Gaza's dead. This is by Spencer Osberg. And look at that devastation of Gaza. The photograph source is WAFA Q2915969 and CC by SA 3.0. Israel's assault on Gaza has now officially surpassed the gruesome milestone of 40,000 Palestinians dead. But in counting only those killed in direct acts of violence, that number captures just a fraction of the human loss. Quote, most civilian casualties in war are not the result of direct exposure to bombs and bullets, noted a 2017 study published by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, no less. Quote, they are due to the destruction of the essentials of daily living, including food, water, shelter, and healthcare, unquote. This broader understanding of conflict casualties was applied to Gaza in a July study, which was published in The Lancet, one of the world's premier medical journals. The study found at that time it was plausible to assume that Israel's military campaign would be responsible for the deaths of some 186,000 people. To calculate this number, the author started with the almost 37,400 direct deaths the Gaza health authorities had confirmed as of June 19th, with which Israeli intelligence services themselves deeming the authorities' counting to be reliable. The authors then cited a survey of armed conflicts over the last several decades that showed the ratio of indirect deaths was roughly between 1 to 3 and 1 to 15. In other words, for every person killed by direct violence in recent wars, there are another 3 to 15 people who died due to conflict-induced factors, mainly preventable diseases and hunger that resulted from losing access to healthcare, shelter, food, and clean drinking water. By the way, this completely applies to Gaza, of course, because the Israelis have deliberately destroyed access to healthcare, shelter, food, and clean drinking water for the Palestinians. The Lancet authors then assumed a rather conservative ratio of 1 to 4. It is rather conservative. Direct to indirect deaths in Gaza, 37,400 direct deaths plus 149,600 indirect deaths to arrive at their estimate. Notably, while Hamas' October 7, 2020 attack on Israel killed more than 1,000 people, I have to object to that because there's evidence that there were roughly 1,100 people killed, but that perhaps half of them were killed by Israelis themselves. But anyway, going on, okay, the direct to indirect casualty ratio is not applicable given that the wider Israeli population wasn't denied the necessities of life for any significant period of time. In Gaza, the 1 to 4 ratio is conservative given that Israeli Air Force has subjected Gaza to the most intense bombing campaign in history. In the first 200 days of the onslaught alone, the Israeli Air Force dropped 20 times more bombs per square kilometer on Gaza than the U.S. did during 9 years of the Vietnam War. Previously, history's most intense bombing campaign that had itself dwarfed those during World War II. This has left most buildings in Gaza damaged or destroyed, and 80% of the population displaced, often numerous times. The Israeli army has almost blocked most food, water, fuel, also electricity, and humanitarian and medical supplies from entering the strip since October 7th. Today, this has left almost 500,000 Gazans facing, quote, catastrophic, unquote, levels of food insecurity, according to the UN, with more than 1.6 million people suffering from acute respiratory infections, jaundice, and diarrhea. 20 of the 36 strips, 36 hospitals inoperable, and the remainder only, quote, partially functional, unquote. The impact of losing access to healthcare is starkly illustrated by the example of pregnant women in Gaza, estimated at 50,000 when the war began. Many have miscarried and are having stillbirths, face C-sections with unsensitized equipment and without anesthetic, while increasing numbers of newborns are, quote, simply dying, unquote, according to the World Health Organization, because starving mothers are giving birth to critically underweight babies. The Israeli campaign in Gaza, for which the world's top two international courts are pursuing charges of genocide and crimes against humanity. And here, I have to say that the wheels of justice in those top two international courts are grinding so exceedingly slowly that before they're finished with their verdicts, there may be nothing to save. It may be all over. But going on, are pursuing charges of genocide and crimes against humanity against the Israeli state and its leaders has continued unabated since the Lancet published its study, with no reason to believe that the 1-to-4 ratio of direct to indirect deaths has decreased. The 40,000 Gazas now confirmed killed by violent means entails that the total deaths attributable to the Israeli campaign would be pushing past 200,000. That is 9% of Gaza's pre-war population. The Israeli army claimed in August it killed 17,000 Hamas fighters. Well, yet the comment on this latest assertion, Hamas itself has said previous Israeli statements of its losses were inflated by more than two-thirds. So, in other words, it's probably looking at something like 8,000 or 9,000 Hamas fatalities. Regardless of which is closer to the truth, what the range makes clear is that combatants make up a fraction of the 200,000 total deaths for which Israel is responsible. To properly place the Gaza death toll in the context of historical atrocities, consider that the first extermination camp the Nazis established during World War II near Chelmno in German-occupied Poland massacred at least 172,000 innocent people, while the atomic bombs that the U.S. dropped on Japan during the same war and their radioactive aftermath are estimated to have killed more than 200,000 souls. Perhaps most tragically, the Gaza Health Ministry figures show that of the 40,000 direct deaths reached by August, 41% were children younger than 18 years old. Children tend to be disproportionately affected by the harms of armed conflict. Thus, it is likely that the ratio of indirect deaths within this age bracket is greater than for the general population. However, using the Lancet's 1-to-4 ratio as a baseline, it is plausible to assume that the number of children Israel's campaign will be responsible for killing, it's at least 82,000. For perspective, 3 children who were laid side by side holding hands would take up roughly a meter's width on average. Some 82,000 children laid side by side would form a line over 27 kilometers long. I guess that's about 18,000, 19,000 miles. An average person, I'm sorry, 18 miles or something. An average person standing on a flat plain would see that line of dead children stretch from them to the horizon and well beyond. That person would have to walk for 5.5 hours to reach the end of the line. That drive would take more than 15 minutes on the highway, traveling at 100 kilometers per hour. All that would apply if today the war ended. As of this writing, however, Israel was still bombing Gaza and blocking access to the necessities of life, thereby ensuring the line of bodies would continue stretching well into the distance. Uh, this article was written once again by Spencer Osberg. A very interesting and well put together article. The only complaint I have is that the 1-to-4 ratio is very conservative, especially continuing the systematic brutality of the bombing, of Gaza and the efficiency of that particular bombing. The Israeli Air Force dropped 20 times more bombs per square kilometer on Gaza than the U.S. did during 9 years of the Vietnam War. It wouldn't surprise me, if the ratio in Gaza isn't 1-to-4, but 1-to-7 or 1-to-10. I don't know what basis Spencer Osberg had for saying that it was 1-to-4. After he stated that the ratio of direct to indirect deaths varies between 1-to-3 and 1-to-15. Why the reason, to believe that it's any less than 1-to-7, or 1-to-8, I don't know. But I'm sure that ratio is just incredible, and that we might be looking at this point 500,000 fatalities, 600,000 fatalities. The question is, how many Palestinians in Gaza, are left, and can we get some better estimates, at this time? So I didn't want to cover that here tonight. I'm sorry I was late here tonight. It couldn't be helped. Lana said, Steve said, stop the world, I want to get off. And Lana said, Steve, my grandma used to say that. Steve says, Lana, laugh out loud. Lana says, Shane was telling me that one of the sites was in trouble for kid sex stuff. Who knows? I mean, the central characteristic of Telegram is that it's pretty much uncensored. Lana says, I figured Grammy was saying hello through you. It's a good thing. Steve says, Lana, could be. I haven't said that in many, many years. Yeah, I haven't said it in many, many years either, but it's a sentiment that's quite appropriate for these terrible times. Steve says, Taiwan is and always will be a part of China. Thank you, Spock. Evelina says, nice background. Steve says, then who would make cheap T-shirts? Evelina says, so that estimate doesn't include those under the rubble. No, it doesn't include those under the rubble. If you add them and then you apply the 1-to-4 or the 1-to-7, this is just out of control. It's just out of control. Lana says, our relationship with China is definitely changing. What should we do to prepare ourselves to make the transition? Do the kinds of things we're doing here, but spread it around. Spread it around. Evelina, over 80,000, easily over 80,000. It might be over 100,000. It depends on the ratio. It depends on the ratio. Okay, folks, it's about 9:22. Okay, I have to go over to Dee's site, give her a hand, but I did want to say but thank you all for coming. This stream was late, so the fact that as many as 25 are still here is very, very good considering that the situation. I do want to say what I'm going to be doing on Saturday when I'll next be back. I'll be dealing with domestic politics here. There's a raft of things, okay, to deal with. I don't quite know exactly what I'm going to focus on, but I promise you it's going to be interesting because there are lots of very, very interesting things to talk about, from industrial policy to huge quantities of money flying around, okay, in the campaign. Uh, just very, very interesting things, okay, to talk about. Uh, Also, there's the issue of a split in the polling community in terms of how to evaluate uh, how the candidates are doing, okay, in the election campaign of 2024. There are now two schools of thought, that have openly developed, and I'm going to have to talk about those on Saturday as well. So with that, okay, I'm going to say good night. I hope you'll be back on Saturday. I don't know if I'll be going at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock on Saturday. It depends on whether Dee is having a show on Saturday. If she's having one, then I'll go at 8 o'clock. If she's not having one, okay, I'll go at 9 o'clock. Again, thank you all for coming tonight.